Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to Black Dragon RPG. I, of course, am John, and today I'm going to be taking a look at starting to delve into one of my favorite settings called Dolmenwood. I want to bring a lot of eyes to this setting. Right now, the creator of Old School Essentials, Gavin Norman, he is working on some campaign setting books, a player's book, a general campaign setting book, and I think a monster book for his creation, Dolmenwood. And right now, if you back his Patreon, you can get like early access to the progress of it. So he releases them in PDF form. Very interesting stuff, which I'm going to take a look at in a different video. But for now, I'm going to talk about Wormskin. Wormskin are these little zines that he released. And these, I think the first one came out in maybe 2015, 2016, sometime around there. Yeah, 2015. And this was like the early stages of him really starting to flesh out the setting of Dolmenwood. So we are going to take a look at this. There are, I think, 7 or 8 issues. We're going to take a look at all of them in coming videos. And I'm going to get you hooked on Dolmenwood so that when the Kickstarter finally launches, you can go back this because it is incredible. The system, of course, for use is Old School Essentials, but from what I have read so far, this could easily be plugged into any setting. A lot of it could. I'd say 95% of this could just be used as a setting in whatever edition you play, and that's why I love it so much. There are going to be some things, of course, stat-wise, that are specific to Old School Essentials, but for the most part, you will really be able to plug this into whatever, or at least take inspiration from it. If anything, it's just an incredible read. So far, all of the stuff released by him, I have been able to just sit down in an evening and just read cover to cover. That's how I like his writing style. I like the way he lays things out. And these are just interesting and inspiring, and you can get so many ideas from them. So we're going to take a look at the PDF of issue 1, and yeah, so let's dive into it. All right, so here we are. This is the cover of Wormskin, the premiere issue. Issue number 1 from autumn of 2015. Seems like forever ago. 7 years this has been in the works. So you'll notice down here it is designated for the OSR. This is before, actually, Old School Essentials officially became Old School Essentials. I think this was back when it was called BX. So yeah, this was like the early days of Gavin's work on Old School Essentials even. So, but yeah. So it says, Premiere Issue, Welcome to Dolmenwood, a shortcut to mushrooms, moss dwarves, and Grimmalkin, and root things, the new monster type. So there's quite a few things in here that are just fascinating. Like I said, I read this cover to cover, so let's take a look. The art in here is also very cool. I think a lot of it is public use, so copyright free, and then there are original illustrations also in here. So here's a little table of contents. We get the map of Dolmenwood. We get the Moss Dwarf NPCs. We get Fungi of Dolmenwood. We get the Grimmalkin and Monsters of the Wood. So they're, it's about 40 pages when it's all said and done. So not a bad length for a little zine. You can pick these up on DriveThruRPG, and you can get them print on demand, which is what I did. So I got the PDF and a print copy sent to me. Like I said, 2015, so that's cool. He does reference Labyrinth Lord, which is another OSR system, and Advanced Labyrinth Lord. So this is really before he was using his own system. So here are the contributors. And then this is just a little brief description of what Labyrinth Lord, or what Dolmenwood is. And it does say it's designed for use with BX, which became Old School Essentials, Labyrinth Lord, and other old school adventure games. I'm going to go ahead and say that maybe 5% of the Dolmenwood stuff is stats. The rest of it, wow, you could take so much inspiration from this. Before I went full in on Old School Essentials, I actually had started to use a ton of Dolmenwood campaign setting stuff for my 5th edition game. So, yeah, do with that what you will, but I do think Dolmenwood is something that no matter what you play, I think you should pick it up because it's just fascinating. So here we get Western Dolmenwood and Eastern Dolmenwood on a hex map, but I do want to show you on Drive-Thru RPG. You can get, I think it's a free download actually, you can get this beautiful map of Dolmenwood. It's a nice hex map. Dolmenwood is supposed to be kind of a fleshed out hex crawl. So all of these little hex numbers, the official campaign book that's coming out will reference all of these numbers. There will be over 200 fleshed out hexes when it's all said and done. So you can imagine how huge of a project this is. These are the noble houses of the East, the noble houses of the West. So these are their coat of arms and stuff. You get a little legend down here. There's just a lot of love put into all of this stuff, and Gavin is just such an amazing creator. That's why I want to support him. All right, so let's get back to... So this is kind of the early workings of that map. So, yeah, definitely serviceable, but I would suggest downloading the free PDF of that very nice map. And then we get into the Moss Dwarf. So this is a race class. What does that mean, you might say, if you've only ever played 5th edition? Back in old school D&D, during the basic expert sets, they did something called race as class. So you could be a dwarf, you could be a cleric, but you couldn't be a dwarf cleric. Dwarf was a class. Pardon my stomach. My stomach is growling. So that is something that sometimes people can't necessarily wrap their heads around, because it does seem weird, doesn't it, to have that race as class, but it is what it is. If I could, let's see, I want to zoom in here. There we go. All right, the Moss Dwarf. But if you ignore, a lot of the old school specific stuff, I think flavor-wise, these guys are just amazing. So basically, they're these dwarves covered in moss and that live in the deep forest, and I love the art in here. So yeah, they literally have like lichen and moss and fungus growing on them, and I just think they're really awesome. They wear they won't wear metal armor, so they'll have armor made of like pine cones, or yeah, it's just really unique. Definitely one of my favorite classes and races. So here are their class abilities. I like this fertile flesh. As Moss Dwarves age, they become riddled with symbiotic plants and fungi, picking up seeds and spores which germinate in the dwarves' fertile flesh. At each experience level, the character acquires a random trait from the table below, and so you've got a D20 table to roll on. So you could end up with edible toe cheese, which is hilarious, skin riddled with mycelia, a miniature tree growing from one ear. See, and like none of this stuff might, if you're not creative, some of this might seem like, well, okay, what's the point? It's just flavor. But you could really, if you're playing this kind of character, you could really do some interesting things with this, I think. I mean, edible mushrooms growing in hair, maybe you could roll on the mushroom table. And they're like, that could be beneficial to the party. You got a party member that's desperate for some healing, and you just happen to have an edible mushroom growing on your head that might heal a few hit points. Like, I don't know. I just think a lot of this stuff is really, if you are creative, you could use this really well. So languages, fungal immunity, and then knacks. So Moss Dwarves practice carefully guarded quasi-magical discipline known as knacks. And those are described later in the book, which I will show you. They get plant speech at 3rd level, so they can literally communicate with plants, and then the plants may respond with a single word. Fungal symbiosis. This is also very cool. They can attempt to enter into a symbiotic agreement with a monstrous or magical fungus. The fungus must be non-hostile and possess at most 3 hit die less than the dwarf. So this could also really be epic for some cool story beats. And then, of course, at 8th level, they can start constructing their own woodland stronghold. Strongholds are something that modern D&D players don't know anything about. Like, strongholds used to be a huge deal in old school gaming. Because what's the point of working towards anything else? Like, you want to become a famous adventurer, get real rich, build your own stronghold. That is one thing I like about Critical Role is their Vox Machina did just that. They built their own stronghold. So here's the knacks. So each Moss Dwarf adventurer practices one of the following knacks, determined at random during character creation. And then you get one at 3rd, 5th, and 7th levels. So you roll a d8, and you get one of these knacks. And they're all really kind of cool. So Bird Friend is just how it sounds. You can make friends with birds. You can speak their secret chirp language and earn their trust. And then the ability levels up as you level up. So by the time you get to a higher level, you can literally call down the defensive wrath of woodland birds. So a flock of sparrows, starlings, thrushes, and blackbirds, which attack as a swarm for 1d6 rounds. Pretty awesome stuff. Locksinger literally lets you charm locks, which is awesome. Nosewise. So you're sensitized to certain subtle aromas, which escape the notice of everyday folk. So that obviously could have its benefits. Pocket lore allows you to, know the number of items in a target's pocket, know the contents of a target's pocket, and so on. Root Friend literally lets you get like a little root vegetable to reveal its secrets, summon edible roots, summon a root thing. So at the end of this book, we'll get the root thing monster. And so by the time you're higher level, you'll be able to actually summon one, and that will obey you. Thread lore, the practice of a mysterious form of whistling, grants the dwarf sympathetic control over threads and strings, which is, now you might read that and be like, what could that possibly do? But there's so many things that you could do with that from a story perspective that are just interesting. And I am a DM that likes when the players think outside the box. So I love all of this stuff. Yeah, let's go to armor. This is really cool. So they won't wear metal, but you could do birch, cork, hog leather, which is multiple layers of thick, blubbery hog leather, oak bark. My favorite's pine cone. Pine cone scales intricately threaded into a quilted cloth backing. And then ringmail, but not the kind you're thinking. Moss Dwarf ringmail is a rare item constructed from hundreds of interlinked rings, the normal kind of rings, which are designed for wear on the finger. So it's not like traditional ringmail. So curiously, this is the only type of metal armor which Moss Dwarves can wear comfortably. So for whatever reason, the rings that people wear on their fingers, they do not bother that kind of metal. I guess doesn't bother Moss Dwarves, so they will literally link hundreds of them together to build their own ringmail, which I think is awesome. And it is a rare item, so this is something you would work towards. Again, this could be a huge plot thing in your story. If you have a player playing a Moss Dwarf, they could literally be collecting rings that they find. So that can give you some ideas for treasure hoards, and your player could work towards this, which I think is really awesome. Here's a illustration of what a Moss Dwarf could look like. Very interesting. And then it goes into random roll tables if you want to create Moss Dwarf NPCs. So you've got a roll chart for trinkets, coins, facial features, victuals, manner of speech, weapons, odor, dress, their beard, which I like this one, cascading ferns, wispy catkins, twigs, fungal mycelia. I think this is all great. You got pets. So you could literally have a curious squirrel that follows you around. You could create some pretty interesting NPCs. And then we get into the Fungi of Dolmenwood. Now, this as a DM, I really love. When people are foraging in the forest, if they're doing like a wilderness trek, this gives you something that you can have your players find that's not just boring. This adds a lot of flavor. And so it goes into how to identify fungi, the chance of identification. So it's a 6-sided die roll. So let's say you are a Moss Dwarf. You would have a 2 in 6 chance of identifying fungi in the forest. If you're a druid, you'd have a 4 in 6 chance, obviously, because druids are so knowledgeable with nature and stuff like that. So I think that's cool. Consuming fungi, so another d6 roll that ranges from no effect to full effect. How to buy fungi, and then tasty edible fungi. So this is basically the edible mushrooms that are commonly available. Then you've got fun psychedelic and magical fungi. So this is really cool. And each of these are described later on. So each of these does something different. Then you've got the bad psychedelic and poisonous fungi that you'd want to stay away from. But if you forage for these, you might be able to sell them to the right thief or assassin for what's listed here. So here's how to sell fungi. You roll a d12. Depending on what you roll, depends on how open they are to purchasing your fungi. I like this. If you roll a 2, it's utter refusal. if the fungus is like a poisonous or psychedelic type, the NPC may inform the authorities. That is very interesting. It gives you a little risk for trying to sell mushrooms and stuff. If you roll a 12, they're delighted and they will pay 80% of the full value. And then this is a chart of the Fungi of Dolmenwood. So now this obviously is a 2-page spread when you're looking at the physical book. So let's start with this amethyst orb. It tells you what the form is. It's a sphere with moist orifices. It tells you the coloration. It's a transparent violet. The odor, horseshit. I love that. It's like, whoa, I did not expect to see that in there. Flavor, tastes like chicken. And then you go to the next page, and here's the effect if consumed. It's nourishing and hearty, and you can get two silver pieces if you're trying to sell it. Or if you're buying it, it will cost you 2 silver pieces. And then it goes through a ton, like every mushroom listed on those charts above, it stats out. So I love this. It just gives DMs something to actually tell their players rather than, okay, you forage and you find some berries and you're good. It gives a ton of flavor, makes the world feel alive. Okay, here is the next race class, the Grimmalkin. Now, I have never been a cat folk kind of person. I forget what they're called in 5th edition. Whatever that cat race is, never on my radar. I don't even prefer, my players wouldn't play a cat folk type race anyways, but even if they tried to, I would highly consider making that an unplayable race. I don't know. To me, they're not that interesting. And anyways, my point with that is I read through the Grimmalkin, and this is how I would do a cat race. This is amazing. It's a race of ageless catfolk related spiritually to the Cheshire Cat of Lewis Carroll's Alice novels, Puss in Boots, and the Kate Sith of Scottish folklore. So this is how I would do it. And they can change, they can phase in and out of 3 different forms. A cunning humanoid form known as an estray, which is like how they typically look. Then they can shift into a stupid cat form known as a chester, and a primal fey form known as a wilder. And it goes into all of that. Look at that. Adorable. So it goes into each one. So basically, you begin as an estray. That's like kind of your typical humanoid cat appearance, where you have obviously intelligence. You're going to know how to use weapons and all of that, and pick locks and all of that, and even spell casting. But transformations. So though Grimmalkin and Estrie, wily and proud, tend to take on some characteristics of mortal folk, their feline nature is never fully suppressed. The instinct to hunt and consume garbage-fed rodents is especially prominent. So if you eat too many rats, if you give in to that primal feline nature too much, you will spontaneously change into a chester. What is a chester? A chester is literally resembles a normal cat in all respects, though it is perhaps unusually fat and stupid in comparison to the average mouser. So your intelligence gets reduced to 3. Being in chester is especially embarrassing to the Grimmalkin, and sometimes it will naturally seek to avoid. It cannot cast spells in this phase, and self-evidently no longer has the wit or psychology to wield weapons or pick locks. So it's a constant battle to fight that that natural feline nature, which I think makes this race extremely interesting, because right there is a flaw that your player has to overcome. So this 10% chance would obviously be rolled on a D100. And so they would have a chance to change into a Chester. If they want to get back to Estrie, it would take some time. They'd have to abstain from consuming rats for 2 weeks in order to return to their previous state. There may be spells of alteration that can be cast to transition back to Estrie form, but those might be rare. If you're the DM, I mean, it's your choice. And then if they're changing from Estrie to Wilder, so a Grimmalkin in Estrie who is near death from wounds or illness may opt to revert to its Wilder phase out of desperation. The transformation requires 1 round. So what is the Wilder? A Grimmalkin in Wilder has returned to its primal fey form and is difficult to see clearly in the mortal world, as more than a gleaming pair of deranged predatory eyes beyond the throw of the lantern's light. This is seriously awesome. Sunlight is perilous to Grimmalkin in Wilder, and they are not especially fond of lesser lights either, and will seek to extinguish them if opportunity allows. So this is pretty awesome. You get class abilities and weaknesses that go along with this. So they can attack with a claw bite attack, which each does D4 damage. But yeah, this is really awesome. If you want to change back to an Estrie, it is an exceedingly difficult task to coax a Grimmalkin back from its atavistic Wilder shape, but not impossible. A potion containing virginal blood infused with moonlight and crushed toadstone is sometimes 65% effective. So you would roll on a D100 to change back. I just think this class and race is just so unique and interesting. I seriously love it. And then in general, this is the Grimmalkin class abilities and weaknesses. They have a susceptibility to cold iron, which I think is interesting. They have a silver sickness that can cause them to sneeze, cough up hairballs, produce weeping of slimy tears. All these symptoms will persist for 1d3 days. So silver is something they don't like, along with iron. And then kitty tipple, which is really awesome. It's fermented catnip juice, sometimes called nippers or kitty tipple, is a common vice among catfolk. Consumption grants a +1 bonus to all melee attack rolls and dex-related throws, but the Grimmalkin must save versus spells or find itself in the cups. Drunken Grimmalkin automatically fail all charisma rolls due to constant bragging. I just love that. Like, can you imagine your players like really getting into their characters? And then this little note down here goes more into weapons made of iron. So they're not common, steel being favored for its strength, but iron weapons must normally be crafted to special order, incurring a 2d6 day delay and a 25% increase in cost. So if you need to go up against a Grimmalkin and you want an iron weapon, you can have one made, but it's going to take time and cost you more money. Here's a cute boy. Look at that. All right. Here is the Estrie spell list. So again, Gavin references Labyrinth Lord Advanced Edition Companion because he has not, at this point, he has not yet written Old School Essentials in its full form. So basically, the Grimmalkin, their spell list is largely drawn from Druid, Magic User, and Illusionist spells. But there are a smattering of unique spells that are completely unique to Grimmalkins. So here's their spell lists of spells that they know. But then any Grimmalkin spell gets a description in this book. I like this one, Furball. Look, he's coughing up a furball. Yeah, this is a very unique class. Like, I am not typically a fan of like the Catfolk in 5th edition, but these guys have so much interesting flavor to them, and not all of it is beneficial to the player. There are some serious setbacks that a player has to overcome if they're playing this race. I love it. And then the last section is Monsters of the Wood. So here we have the Root Thing. So there's only one monster featured in this book, and it is the Root Thing, and I love these sentient humanoid root vegetables which emerge from the soil in autumn to hunt hapless humans and demi-humans. So this is such a cool monster, and I have definitely used these guys in my campaigns. And then it kind of gives you some ideas for how you could encounter them. So you might see one about to bury itself in the earth with a screaming child in its grasp. I just think this is all really awesome ideas. Here's the traits, depending on what root type it is. So if you're a burdock root, then it's 10 foot tall, spindly, bleeds a sticky white sap. So each monster, depending on what root vegetable it's based on, looks different. So you've got a lot of variety. And then general traits. Here's a very abstract piece of art. I like how abstract this piece is, because it doesn't necessarily define in your imagination what it's supposed to look like, so that leaves it completely up to your brain once the DM describes it. I think everything's better in the imagination. And that's the last page. This is an advertisement. So you've got the complete campaign setting is in development. So it'll be published as a set of 3 deluxe hardcover books packed with fairy tale magic and eerie folk horror. So you've got the player's book, the campaign book, and the monster book. And then if you want a monthly dose of Dolmenwood, you can support Necrotic Gnome on Patreon, which is what I do. And each month he releases PDFs of things that he has worked on. Right now he's about 50% done with all the hexes. So out of 200 hexes, there are now 100 of them that are completely finished and compiled into a PDF, which I like. I'm going to do a video on the Patreon in more, just to give you some details on what you're getting if you support this. And there's the back cover. So very, very cool. I hope you guys enjoyed this look at Wormskin issue 1. And that, my friends, was Wormskin issue 1. We will be taking a look at the other 7 in coming videos, and then I'm going to do a video discussing the Necrotic Gnome Patreon, where you can go and be early supporters, let's say, whatever they call them, early supporters of the Dolmenwood project, because he's making official Dolmenwood campaign setting books, and it's going to be quite amazing. So hopefully you stay tuned for that. I love all of this old school OSR stuff, and hopefully you open your minds to it as well, because D&D is great, but there are other games out there and small-time creators, and I like to support those little guys. So, all right, I will catch you all in the next video. Peace.